So before boot camp, I was making $15 an hour at the hospital. And then as a server, you don't really make much in terms of base pay, but tips, I think, came out to an additional 200 or so a week. Even just working at App Academy, my salary doubled. But when I got my first job as a software engineer, I was making a base of 115K, and then with an additional bonus of like 10 or 11K or something like that. So my total comp was 126. And so from my initial job, I think I pretty much quadrupled my salary.
Did you know that becoming a software engineer can help your dating life? Well, I'm not making any promises, but that's exactly what happened to David. You hear about his transition from being a completely non-technical waiter to making six figures as a software engineer, his thoughts on whether it's a good enough reason to be a software engineer just for the money, and how he spent almost 100 hours a week studying to be a software engineer. Let's dive in. So, what were you doing before going to the boot camp, and what was the moment where you decided this is something that you wanted to do?
Yeah, so before boot camp, I was working at the hospital for about 3 years as a physical therapy aide. And on the side of that, I was also working at a restaurant as a server. So I was working two jobs and just barely making rent, barely making groceries, and then not really having much else at the time. And then I had a friend who really inspired me because he was like a history teacher. And then he just taught himself how to code and was able to land a job within a year. So I was like, wow, okay, well, if he could do it, I could do it. I've never touched a computer in my life. I've never done anything tech related. Maybe I can learn. Maybe I can try. I think upfront was about 17K. And that's a lot of money. That's like more than even like an in-state tuition for college. It's a huge financial commitment. But luckily, App Academy offered this deferred tuition repayment program where they'd only take a percentage of your first software engineer salary. They take, I think, about 28% of your first year salary.
You also said you had no experience in coding or anything technical at all. How important is it to be technical or have some kind of coding background?
I had tried a couple classes on Udemy just to learn basic HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. When you apply to App Academy, they put you through this interview process and they ask you a bunch of behavioral questions, but they also give you all this material to do some technical interviews. And they have Ruby as the language of choice that they teach to their boot campers. And so I was actually given this huge packet of Ruby material. And I was like, oh, shoot, I didn't learn Ruby. I only learned HTML, CSS. So this was definitely new. I just remember studying in between jobs and in between during lunch breaks when I was working. And I passed the first technical interview.
When you were going through boot camp, did you still have a job at the time, or was it you're fully dedicated all your time towards the boot camp?
Yeah, so App Academy, I think they're famous for telling their students, like, yeah, you don't have a life outside of boot camp, or you really don't have time outside of boot camp because they're expecting you to put in 90 to 100 hours a week. And I really did put about 90 to 100 hours a week when I was in the boot camp. I was studying pretty much after 6 up until maybe like midnight or 1 a.m. in the morning. And then I got maybe, if I was lucky, I got like my full 7 hours. But if I had an exam the next day, I'd wake up earlier just to study and get a little bit more practice in before my assessment because they had assessments every Monday morning. And so, yeah, your weekend was basically all studying for that assessment so you don't fail. Because if you failed two assessments, I think they would just kick you out.
Once you graduated, what was the job market like? Tell us about getting that first job as a boot camp graduate.
I just remember that there was about maybe an average 4 to 6 months that it took the majority of my cohort to get a job. I think I was 2 months in and I was getting pretty desperate just because I wasn't expecting to not have like much traction after 2 months. And App Academy, luckily, they had a position open for an instructor role. So I applied for their junior instructor role and I was, I think, very lucky to get in. I think I was working for a total of 6 months as a lead instructor. And then I decided to job search again just because I was like, okay, I think I have almost like a year's worth of experience like as an instructor, and I think this will help me get another job, like an actual software engineering job. So I applied for a few jobs. I did get a few interviews, and I think having the title of lead instructor definitely helped. And so that helped me get my first job at a company called Persado, which did generative AI. And so that was really cool and a great opportunity.
That's awesome. That must have been really exciting getting that first job. So you actually share with us your salary progression between the time before going to the boot camp up until now. Can you share that with us?
Yeah, yeah. So before boot camp, I was making $15 an hour at the hospital. And then as a server, you don't really make much in terms of base pay, but tips, I think, came out to an additional 200 or so a week. And so in total, I think monthly I was just bringing in close to maybe 2000-ish a month. It wasn't really a lot. And so, yeah, so I had to live with my parents and I had a lot of debt that I was still trying to pay off. And so I really didn't have any savings. I didn't have much money by the end of the month. So just really living paycheck to paycheck. When I got my first job at App Academy, even just working at App Academy, my salary doubled basically. Like I was making, I think I jumped from $20 an hour as a junior instructor to about 70K as a regular instructor. And then as a lead instructor, I made close to 96, something like that. And so that already doubled my salary when I was working at the hospital. And so that was just App Academy. But when I got my first job as a software engineer, I was making a base of 115K. And then with an additional bonus of like 10 or 11K or something like that. So my total comp was 126. And so from my initial job, I think I pretty much quadrupled my salary. So
Yeah, I mean that's amazing. Do you remember what that was like getting that first paycheck once you got this new job, either as an instructor, probably more so when you're the instructor, and all of a sudden your pay is like multiple times more than what you got paid just months ago?
yeah, so it felt like a lot of money. It felt like a lot of money to me. I was like, "Oh my God, this is the most money I've ever seen in a paycheck." And I was just like super excited and I was like, okay, so real talk. I was like, I can date now. Like I can actually go out and I can meet people because I feel like I have a little bit more confidence. And funnily enough, I did. I started online dating, and actually, the first person I met on Hinge is still my girlfriend now. And so for me, it was a complete like quality of life change in terms of like opportunities that I had just as an individual. And actually, I also was able to help out my parents a little bit more. So I help out now with like rent and hopefully like future retirement for them, do things that I've wanted to do and help the people that I want to help. And so for me, it was a huge shift in the way that I thought about myself, the way I thought about money, and I didn't have to worry anymore. Like I didn't have to like constantly look at my bank account, just be like, okay, I need to calculate every single penny. If I want to buy a latte, I was going to go out and buy a latte. You know what I mean? Like without really worrying that this was going to break me. It was a huge change and blessing.
So for someone out there that they're thinking about going to become a software engineer, going to boot camp because the primary reason is for the salary increase, but they feel bad about it. They feel like, nah, this doesn't seem like the right commitment or right thing to do just for the money. What do you have to say to them about that? Like, is that a valid reason to consider this career? Or what are your thoughts on that?
I think yes and no because I think it was a huge motivator for me. It was like, well, if I don't succeed, I'm gonna die. Like basically that's how it felt. Like I didn't have a job. I was broke. I was very much desperate. So for me, getting through boot camp definitely meant I had some sort of motivating factor. And so yeah, getting a better paying job is a huge get into coding and who are going through a rigorous boot camp. But I can't say that it's everything because you have to kind of enjoy it. You have to enjoy coding, otherwise, it's just going to become very draining on you and you're going to burn out a lot faster because all you're doing every day is looking at lines of code. And I see it more so like I'm problem solving, so it makes it more fun for me. And so I think, yeah, money is important in the initial adrenaline rush of like getting you to change your career. Like you're just like, I can't survive like this anymore. I need to do something different. But once you're actually in the grind of studying, you have to love it. Otherwise, you're going to just feel like, why am I doing this? I think the number one thing is if you really enjoy problem solving and you don't care how long it takes, but as long as you get the solution, like I think that's a great start to whether or not you should pursue software engineering because that's literally my everyday. The second question would be, do you enjoy learning new things every single day? Because that's also part of software engineering. There's so much to learn in this field that you will honestly constantly feel like you know nothing.
What do you think is the biggest misconception or myth about being a software engineer? Or like, what do you think maybe a misconception or myth that you had before going through the boot camp and getting that very first job? Like, what kind of misconception or myths did you hold or you see other people holding?
That's funny because I was very naive when it came to understanding what software engineering was, and like whenever you watch a movie and they're like, there's a coder in there who's like on the keyboard, like you think that's kind of what it's like you're constantly facing some sort of data breach or security breach and you're just like go 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 go, like hurry up, there's a time crunch. I mean, in some cases it's like that if you break production, which I actually broke yesterday. So, it happens, but those kind of things are very rare and only for like very specific people in the team. Most of the time you're working on a very isolated task that yeah, it does play into the whole, but you actually become like kind of the expert in what you're working on. I always thought like, okay, software engineering, I think it was something that felt like very high stake at a lot of times, but you have such a big team of people that are willing to help and step in, even if they haven't worked on what you're working on, right? They're just willing to take the time with you. And so I think the team aspect is really great. I actually didn't know that it was such a great community. I didn't know that it was a very helpful community. The people are just always willing to lend a hand. I really thought it was a very, okay, you're isolated in your own room and you're just kind of a hermit.
What have you found is like the most important skill set to develop to continue to be successful as a software engineer?
Just make sure you're able to work well with other people because you are going to be working with other people pretty often. And you're not going to know the answers to everything. You're not expected to know, you're not hired to know the answers to everything. You're expected to figure them out, but not alone. You're supposed to work with others and you're supposed to make sure you take others' input and just be a good team player overall. I think that's definitely something you need to have as a software engineer, at least to be a good one, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. And would have a certain kind of skill set or a certain thing that you feel like you should have prepared more for before getting that first job? Like now that you're in industry for a bit, you look back on the very early days and thought to yourself like, oh, if I knew this or if I spent more time here, it would have made my first 6 months of on a job a lot easier than it was.
That's a good question. I don't know if there was anything particular that I was like, I wish I knew more of this because I wish I knew more of everything. I wish I just knew more. I think that if I was to go back and understand, like, I wish I could do this better, was understand what clean code is. Readability of code and reusability of code, I think, are two really important things when it comes to your first software engineering job because it shows that you're a good asset to the team. Like you're not constantly making these mistakes that seniors would have to correct.
What do you think is your most controversial or your hottest take about the software engineering career, or maybe even boot camps and going through a boot camp route to get a job?
Man, do I have any hot takes? That's a good question. I guess a hot take these days, like on the topic of AI and like whether AI is going to take over software engineers, my personal opinion is no, not for a long while, if anything, just because problem solving is something that I think requires a human touch a little bit because you have to be able to consume a lot over like a very large span of things that I don't know if machines will always like get right, you know? Not that humans get it right all the time either, but I think what really matters is like how as a software engineer, you're going to be looking at a problem not just from like a user's perspective, but also a developer's perspective. You're going to be like, okay, I understand this is what a good UX would look like, but also from a software engineering side, is this clean code? Is this good code? Can I read this code? And can I, help others grow with this code? And so I think more so than just like, I don't think software engineers are just people who churn out code like what AI is expected to do, right? It's code that is eventually going to help people, like the users, and possibly grow the product and the company, but also help fellow engineers. And that's something that I think is something that you can only really do and like learn from well when you're working with other people. And so, yeah, I don't know if like even if the best AI could write an entire app from scratch, I feel like if you're using that app as a user, you may find some things that just like this just feels robotic. It doesn't feel like it has the human touch, and it doesn't feel like it has the aspect that like someone who was actually thinking about the user or thinking about the product would actually put into it.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time. David, who's a software engineer at Namely and alumni of App Academy, a coding bootcamp. Thank you so much for coming on, sharing your journey, advice, and experience with us, David.
Thank you, Felix. Thank you for having me. It was great.